Okay, we're going to look into Etruscans today. Now, I've already did one on this, and the background music I tried to add drowned me out to where you couldn't hear what I was saying. People say I already have enough time with my Dolby and things that are on it, so I thought I would just try to redo this actually and leave it off, and I hope I have the same style and flair this time as I did before. Quite often when something like that happens, I get pretty discouraged. Indeed, I have a whole page over here of videos I need to redo from last year still and early this year. Syrian Dak Warriors. This is from Robert Morningsky's books. Syrian Dak warriors who had once stood proudly beside an all-powerful sun god Ra were known as the Ra'im, or Ra at the side of, or people at the side of Ra. Powerful and courageous, their memories removed, they leave Egypt to settle in lands on the northern shore of what is now the Mediterranean, across, or around, or both. Called Drakans, meaning heavenly Dak, are Drakans. They become the Ra'im, begin to build their own empire. Now, Drakans are having ans on the end of it, lets you know that they're heavenly Drak, and this has an idea of Drakans and drakes and dragons, and that these people look up to a heavenly thing. Well, what is heaven in that statement? On. And On is the heaven of the Sumerians. And it goes back to way, way before, having On be the sound that is associated with the heavens above, and so on. And we'll find some of their architecture in this. We're going to try to do this in a two-part and see if I can get through it all. The first part has a lot of architecture, second part a lot of different graphics and different things that they had done in art. And Etruscans are known as Tarsanoi or Rashenna. And Ruashina, if you added a U to that, would make them the people of the wind, which is kind of strange in Sumerian and in the Bible too. Ruach is known as the heavenly wind. So people of the wind. People sometimes follow birds and things like that. So it leads to a concept that goes with that. And the Etruscan civilization is the modern name given to powerful, wealthy, and refined civilization of ancient Italy in the era corresponding to Tuscany. And so Etruscan, Tuscan, you get this idea. It's western Umbria and northern Lazio, and distinguished by its unique language. This civilization endured from before the time of the earliest Etruscan inscriptions, which are about 700 BC, until its assimilation into the Roman Republic, beginning at the late 4th century BC with the Roman-Etruscan Wars. And I'm just going to sneak in here too, the only people that seemed to like they didn't get touched by double lap over in this entire area here are the Basques. And people talk about where they come from and all these type of things. They're the ones that are from there. Everybody else kind of got an intermingling and such that's extremely complex from waves of Proto-Indo-Europeans coming in and out and stuff. And there was a way more interaction than people want to give any credit for. They almost want to act like, well, these were always over here, didn't know nobody over here was, and then there's a mountain, so they didn't know nothing. And it's not like that in any way, shape, or form. Now, this culture that has been identified as Etruscan developed in Italy about 800 BC, approximately over the range of the preceding Iron Age Villanovan culture that was there. The later gave way in the 7th century to a culture that was influenced by ancient Greece or Magna Graecia and Phoenicians. It at its maximum extent during the foundation period of Rome and the Roman kingdom itself. It overlapped over the area. In fact, it butted up against Rome itself and then over-interlapped it, coming right into preemptively what became Rome. And people always wondered what became of the Etruscan society and Etrurians and things along those lines. But Etruscan civilization flourished in 3 confederacies of cities: Etruria, the Po Valley, and so you wonder where Sidon and Poseidon have to do with anything, i.e. as in Neptune and so on, when these people had come from around that peninsula that was there, known as today as Anatolia, I guess, is one frequent name that's used for it. And of course, this is named after Enat, the goddess of the Levant, the daughter of El, who is Saturn, and his wife Asherah, the queen of heaven. They have a son named Baal, who's of course the storm god, equivalent to Zeus, and the sister Anat, which is said to be a beautiful princess who turned a goddess of war. And this deals with Ashtara, Asherah, Inanna, Diana, and all of those mythologies that all go together. As I've been explaining, it's all the same thing and variations on a theme of these people that really were, right at the end of the last ice age, extremely more connected than people believed. And through the last ice age and before, they were kind of shoved down and together quite a bit more. And then when that release was made, over the process of a couple of thousand years, quite a bit of migration went on, and settling, and then back migrations and so on. Quite a complete mess if you look at it. I've seen somebody try to draw it out on a board with different colored markers, and it ended just looking like vomit by the end of it. But let's continue. It says, although the Etruscans developed a system of writing, the Etruscan language remains only partially understood, and only a handful of texts of any length survive, making understanding their society and culture heavily dependent on much later, generally disapproving Roman sources. And in general, you can see the Romans calling everybody a barbarian out of the area. In fact, the people that were in their entire area that they grew up and threw out of. But, whatever. Politics were based on the small city and probably the family unit. In their heyday, the Etruscans elite grew very rich through trade with the Celtic world to the north and the Greeks to the south, and filled their large family tombs with imported luxuries. Archaic Greek had a huge influence on the art and architecture, or people see in that, but you'll also see some Sumerian, and you'll see some blends that actually are from Greek and ancient Egypt all the way through there, and all the Middle East. And a feeling that you get from these people too, that whenever you look at where they're at, way over here in that boot, it just doesn't seem to be correct to put them there at the time they're there. But let's continue. Politics were based on the small city and probably the family unit. So archaic Greece had huge influences on them. The latest mitochondrial DNA study in 2013 shows that Etruscans appeared to fall very close to Neolithic populations from Central Europe, and to other Tuscan populations in their ancestry to the modern inhabitants of Castantino and Volterra areas. And Volterra actually has to do, strangely, with Volt and Terra, with lightning striking the earth, just like Baalbek and so on is attached to it, and all of the stories around there of such. Of course, you don't see much rain in those areas now, but back in the time whenever it was really needed in droughts and so on, it was really looked upon as being part of what God did, definitely to a larger degree than we ever think of nowadays. The ancient Romans referred to the Etruscans as Tusci or Etrusci, and their Roman name is the origin of the terms Tuscany, which refers to their heartland, and Etruria, which can refer to the wider region. And in Attic Greek, the Etruscans were known as Tyrians, and later Tarsinoi, and the Tyrian Sea. But where's Tyre at? Isn't that Phoenician, and isn't that the edge of Anatolia up there at the top of the Levant? And so, and what is tyranny? And why is it attached to that people's name and these people's name and that ocean that's way over there in between Spain and Italy? What's up with that? And why is the ancient name of Spain Iberu and sounds so much like Hebrews? And yet there's another place of Iberia that's way over here too. The people carry names with them sometimes, and then other people knowing that named them such. Is that how that actually, I guess, works out long term? Anyhow, the early Tarsino, from which Romans derived the names Tyrrhene or Etruria and Mar Tyrrhenium, or the Tyrrhenian Sea. This prompted some to associate them with the Teresh, that are part of the sea peoples that the Egyptians talk about that came in that time. The word may also be related to Hittite, Taruta, and the Hittites were a great one of the three, and actually caught in between Sumeria and the Akkadians there, and caught in between there and down into Egypt, and all these people running over each other the whole time. It kind of leads you to let you know where people went to, what happened to certain people. Now, the origin of the Etruscans are most likely lost in prehistory, they tell you, but people are finding through this symbology, through this art and so on, and through ancient stories, where they come from. Because he tells you, although Greek historians as early as the 5th century BC repeatedly associate the Tyrrhenians or Tuscany with Pelasgians, and Thucydides and Herodotus and Strabo all denote Lemnos as settled by Pelasgians, who Thucydides identifies as belonging to the Tarsinoi. And although both Strabo and Herodotus also agree that the migration was led by Tyrrhenius, a person who is son of Ades, who was the king of Lydia at the time, so over there, Strabo specifies that it was the Pelasgians of Lemnos and Imbros that followed Tyrrhenius or Tarsinos to the Italian peninsula. Lemnian-Pelasgian link was farther manifested by the discovery of the Lemnos stelae, whose inscriptions were written in a language which shows strong structural resemblances to the language of the Tyrrhenians or Etruscans, although it could have been written in their language due to conquest also, and then written in their language, which is done in some of these cases. But anyhow, Dionysius of Halicarnassus records a Pelasgian migration from Thessaly to the Italian peninsula, noting that the Pelasgi made themselves masters of some of the lands belonging to the Umbri, and Herodotus describes how the Tarsinoi migrated from Lydia to the lands of the Umbri. So there is quite a few. Of course, we look at Herodotus and things, and there seems to be a lot of conjecture, and a lot of things are hearsay. And back then, in just a few series of hundreds of years, people lose the idea. What's really helping us today is genetics. Genetics show you, oh, well, okay, these guys are closely related to the Neolithic population from Central Europe in the first place. So that's not necessarily that they got taken over, but they got ingested with the people, and the people that ingested didn't even take over necessarily. So the Etruscans, or the Tuscany, are one of the tribes of the so-called Sea Peoples. During the collapse of the Bronze Age, volcanic eruptions of Santorini and the island exploding, causing a huge problem. I know I've made a few videos about how the Eye of the Sahara and things seem to really relate exactly to the telling of Atlantis, and it even shows it on their maps as having been there. But there's another concept that this island, if we didn't say 9,000 years and we said 900 years, and we understood the pillars of Hera as being up through here, then you might get the idea that whenever you came out, you ran right into that island, and that island blew up. And what's showing here is different levels of ashes in centimeters. Is that what it is? Yeah, in centimeters. And so little islands, you get a half a centimeter, 2, 4, 10, 20, 12 centimeters, and it reaches all the way through what we call Turkey or Anatolia, all the way through the Levant, even way down into Egypt. And strangely enough, too, there's a record of a place in Egypt that seemed to have gotten 30 centimeters. If you'll look, that's 30 centimeters right down there by me. And that's a higher reading than even the little islands right next to it in some way, shape, or form. Makes almost no sense. And it's down there in the Delta, and they found it in a couple of areas there when they were testing it. But so when it had really taken off, it drove a lot of people to come off into the Mediterranean, and some to ditch it and come out up into these areas because of that conflict, and some of the people going there going after those conflicts. And it kind of resettled the Mediterranean somewhat, which had already been resettled kind of like 3 times already, if we look at it just out of the last ice age, by other waves of people coming in from over here to there and there to here and so on, but also endemics being there pretty much in every situation, in every place. Anyhow, this island of Lemnos is way up here in the Aegean Sea. I don't know if you remember my video recently about just south of there, right about tucked in here, they found an ancient stone circle, much like Stonehenge, and it's so deep in the water that the last time that would have been above water would have been about 9,400 BC, and it looks like, yeah, that's one of the places that flooded in as the Ice Age left away. During the collapse of that Bronze Age Santorini explosions, they're related to the Minoans. They contracted with their Hagi civilization from Sardinia, or what we know as Shardana, and it has to do with the tribe of Dan. And with the Phoenicians, or the Canaanites, here he relates them as being the same. And indeed, the Phoenicians called themselves Canaan. So these are contracted with the Mycenaean population as a result of excavations on the island of Lemnos up in the Aegean Sea we were talking about. There were inscriptions close to the grammatical structure of that Etruscan language. Strabo specifies that it was the Pelasgians of Lemnos and Imbros that followed Tyrrhenius to the Italian peninsula. And so perhaps when our people started getting blanketed in here and problems arose out of that, some left and went left of this picture here, and off across into these seas for a better time and a better place than what had happening. Volcanoes have caused a lot of problems. Volcanoes quite often cause a lot of problems so far downwind the people were really unaware of the volcano even doing its problem, or even exploding or doing anything along those lines. It just happens. They just start having problems. There's a few of those that I could probably note to, but we'll just continue on from here. So that's a mapping of the Sea People's invasion and the idea of where the people and the names had come from, and how these Sea Peoples came in and tried to invade. And of course, a lot of the tales that show you the Sea Peoples tell you that they came with families and things. It's clearly noted in the Egyptian documents of such. And so it wasn't just warriors coming down to have a field day or something that seemed like more of a Viking come and swipe and go. And so now we're looking at it written in Russian. This is from Vlad9VT. He's a Russian guy that makes a whole lot of videos about ancient civilizations, and this is just a culmination of pictures and things that he have found that show them. He goes through a lot of vids that show ancient cycloptic and Neolithic stonework and so on, and how they work with each other in some ways. And so it kind of shows you. This is kind of like the Battle of the Sea Peoples here, where you can see almost 4 different variations of people going on at one time, and outcomes of such problems that come from things like this. But and you can see depictions like this on the Egyptian artwork where people are bound up in such a form and fashion. And we look at Etruscans and you can find weird oddities like the circle pattern here that we're looking at. I know it probably doesn't show up too big there, but the circle pattern that's showing here, what's odd about this is that this is what's shown on those ancient wizard hats made of gold that people have figured out show you the seasons and the changing of them and going with the lunar calendar and the whole 9 yards. And if you look closely, it has swastikas going around each one. And what I've shown you recently in a couple of videos is that if you take the wagon, what we know as the wagon or the bear or Ursa Minor, and you watch it go through the seasons with its tail, it's shaped kind of like a swastika, or some of the symbols they even use. And if you let it pivot through the 4 seasons, it actually makes this symbology. And it's quite possible that's where it came from. There's a lot of conjecture because it goes back many thousands of years, and it doesn't have anything to do with World War II necessarily. But in these Etruscans, they find Roman artwork of the concept of Romulus and Remus, and they say that it predates the Roman starting where they were talking about it. So does it overlap right there, and what does go along with it? Now we're going to look at some of these tombs. There's also ancient stories about all kinds of things, limbo dances and doing these type of things, and different cultish practices that are going on in this area. And so if we look here, here's Rome, and it's really teetering on the edge of it, and here we have Etruria, and then the Etruscan expansion is the darker, all the way from the Po River that's up here on the edge of the Adriatic that leads in, right? And so the ancient, where Po and Poseidon had come from, are gone, and you can see it encompasses the whole idea in here. It doesn't run into the Umbrians and the Sabines as much yet, but it will, and it takes over Corsica and things, and takes over the whole area pretty much in a short period of time. And then what we're looking at here is 750 to 500 BC, and you can tell this runs right over into Roman conflict. Here again is that pendant set that we were looking at, and it shows you these ducks, waterfowl, going around in a symbolic circle, right? In doing so, also it has the symbology of the four edges and the swastikas that are in this. In one of my old swastika videos, and one that I've done recently, I show very many artifacts that are like this, but I don't think I've ever shown this one and the symbol of 3 that it carries along with it. And so kind of a neat little structured thing. People have looked at this and tried to figure out if it has anything to do with the seasons, the number of cubes that are growing around it. It doesn't so much. You also see depictions which are, of course, now would be looked at as extremely pagan, but this is like a Pan type of god, or the satyr people and stuff. Her hair finely braided, colorful, and most of these statues and most Greek statues that we see today are actually painted before, maybe not as elaborate as this, but they're painted in somewhat of a realistic form. Here you can see her and their goddess's gaze. She has almost elfin ears here, but not quite, but then the ears of a goat. And this really goes all the way back to ancient people who had a lot of things to do with nature. This is indeed some aspect of Mother Nature herself. Another neat thing as we get into the architecture here is you see these multi-cubbyhole places that are all over, and we're going to look at these just slightly closer for a minute, but there aren't just even in Italy. And so you can see this style of these people that they had going on that really goes to a lot farther away, from Petra in Jordan all through Italy. But you can also find some in the Levant area also, and all around Israel itself even. Here's a neat picture. If you just look at it right in here, you can see, and right in here there's a pass-through that goes from these two places. This one is worn through over time, and you can see how much erosion has gone on during this. But this pillowed effect here is really odd because it's more of a solid stone and it's been pillowed with that effect. And then these cubby holes are almost a reversing of that, where it gives you a whole bunch of little cubby holes. It's not big enough to stuff scrolls in or anything like that. It's a honeycomb effect. Looks like plant cell structure. And you can see through this pass-through right here, which we would think of this as being 4 windows today or something along that line, but this is all hewn out of one gigantic rock and taken. A cave is made into it, and this is just the outside. The inside's huge. This is not it. It'll show it into a different picture, but if I was to tell you this is a wine cellar from the 1400s, you'd be like, oh, they stick the bottles in the holes. But no, this is Etruscan stuff from God knows when. Was it a wine cellar? Well, they didn't have a bottled wine and setting and all those things at that time. The cubbies aren't really deep enough to put a bottle type thing in. People have made up stories that they had said they put candles in all these in votives. There's no real sign of the candleage or the wax anywhere over and above. Here's a neat picture that actually shows this. Looks like smelting has gone on here in the old days, but we're going to take a closer look at what this wall looks like, because it gives a strange effect. Also, see here, there's a skylight cut all the way through the roof, all the way up, by the way. Look here on the wall, and you can see the remnant or the starting of a cubbyhole set that they were doing here, and it almost looks like somebody has some type of like close hair razor just going yum, 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 and just cutting out little sections of this, almost like they have some kind of wicked tool. There's also little archaic holes cut through here, and scientists have said some of this is real old and some of this is what the hell. And what we're looking at here is this cell structure thing that's kind of like a what the hell. And is this them just taking a wall down to flat? Well, what's this technique? We'll find the same technique probably about 10 times here, and it seems to be odd, but I can find this technique quite all over the place. It's quite strange, isn't it? A little bit. So Strangely, you can find the same style in Israel, but it seems to be a little more pyramidic. But you can find it in Petra, Jordan. You can find it in two places there, definitely. Italy, Tuscany, Tel Marisha, two places in Israel, and this one's not triangulatic at all. Umbria in Italy, all the way down Lazio, Karamaz. So all of these places, even Isla Bettina has it in this island and crutch that's up in here built in. Seems kind of odd. Oh yeah, the Nabatean area here. So out into the Yemen desert, Wadi Seir, Nabatea, right? But then Seir has to do with a lot of things. This is a wadi or an oasis though, and you can find this out there, which at one time, not too many thousands of years ago, was not an oasis, but the whole area was much more lush, like you see here and so on. There's these Kurgan burial mimic mounds that are here that are strangely almost like a hobbit home village. But when you look at them closer, there's a lot more going on than a hobbit home village concept at all. And here we start to see some of that plant cell structure looking cyclopean pillow rock effect. And some people just slough this type of thing off, but others people can't quite get enough of it. Oop, I hear thunder. Hopefully my power won't glitch out on me while I'm doing this. It's kind of fuzzy in this picture here, but what I want to make note of is this is one giant piece of rock over here, and then they've unpurposely cut and vented into it, and then built around. This is round and arched, and these rocks aren't flat, but slightly arched. Apparently they put it together and then even, sanded it evenly across in some way, shape, or form. But all the cuts that are in here that don't have to be in here whenever you build this Cyclopean stuff, and how it's so tightly together and structured, you can see plants growing out of it, and that's probably what's caused a lot of the problems around through here. Amazingly, whenever they found this, it was just overgrown with ivy and crap, and they had to excavate this pretty much all back out. It had already overgrown and been taken away to where you almost wouldn't see it anymore. In a couple of thousand more years, somebody might run into it accidentally, and we're really talking about in the Tuscan countryside, right next to some vineyards, literally across the road from a set of vineyards that had been there since primordial times, that was probably hooked up with this civilization, and then the people that had it at that time weren't even aware that this type of thing was going on. Now, they did have dirt, it seemed, on the top of it, almost like old mud homes and stuff that really helped protect it from the heat, from the cold, insulation, and so on. A lot of these are facing in a similar direction, but not always. And it's looked at, some of them are at different solstices and different points. Some of them are just in between, though, and it might actually be around their birthday, from the far end this way to the far end that way. Or maybe they're just off a little bit. They have step-ins into them and giant cycloptic rocks. And people look at these and they go, wow. And they don't realize there's a 48-ton rock they estimated at, squared off. Now here's the thing. If that was squared off nicely instead of rounded off like it is now, how long would it take? So you ask geologists, in an area with about this much rainfall, and you take this type of granite-style limestone rock, how long would it take for it to do this? And he says, oh, probably about 5,000 or 6,000 years. And then they zoom out on the picture and they go, well, this is at this Tuscany rock. And he goes, oh, Tuscany? That's about 2,000 years old. And he goes, no, you said the rock here would have to have about 6,000 years of erosion onto it. He goes, yeah, but maybe it wasn't so squared off. And he goes, well, that was part of the question. Anyhow, let's continue. How long had some of this stuff been here? And that's a huge question, probably much bigger than the place itself. Look at these rivulets and where this river system is running through this thing. That they actually have these tombs and this ancient waterway looking thing that's run down, that of course now they have walkways to, and it doesn't have it to it. And now some of these are 2-story and propped up, and you can barely make it out maybe in the picture here, but all of these are done out of cycloptic stone, and it's holding up a wall of dirt. It's 35 foot tall, and these tombs here that are all facing to the east, and they have inset cuts into them and an undercarriage and a second floor. Kind of neat. And these rocks right here, extremely well fit together. This whole wall right here, it's one of those credit card walls, and this extra sized archways that you see in these other things that are flattened. They're not round off like these dome missiles that they have here, but they're more flattened out. This is slightly blurry. You can see these plants growing on these things, and you know how the rooting would start tearing things up and so on. There's a lot of these pictures where it'll show as symbolism, which people have said that looks like Orion, 1, 2, and 1 off a little, if you get that. But of course, every time you have 3 holes in a line and one of them's out of line, it can't be Orion. But then again, it can. And then the guys that were saying this says, well, if that's facing Orion, that's where it goes around and around at. So does that have something to do with it? I don't know. But there's old ones like this, and then newer looking things like this. Old things like this. They're very old. And some of these almost look like the Assyrian inside of it. In fact, I've seen one guy's report of the Etruscan Assyrian, and it is not on that scale in any way, shape, or form. But look at the carving that's done out of the inside of here. They've literally made an internal house out of a solid giant rock. And you only see that there and a few other places. I think it shows this picture again here, but here's a tomb that's been cut out, falsified pillars, and then what we know is a pan ceiling today all put around it, right? Well, they call it a pan ceiling because it looks like upside down pan, or they call it a pan ceiling because of Pan the god and some kind of thing that went with it thousands of years ago. I'm willing to go with the skillet effect, but hey, this is a land that had something to do with Pan. You'll see that. You'll also see Humbaba in the story of Gilgamesh here in a second. If this goes to part 2, we probably will here shortly. The next part will be in your top left-hand corner, and we'll go through that. Rather than just doing a slideshow, I like to vamp over the top of it and give you some forms of extra information, what you might be looking at. Look at these inset doorways, though, and how they look very much like Inca inset doorways, and you see that same spread out giant A or Aleph horned or side pillar doorway in a lot of places. And it's believed that whenever people started building in this way, they had to make a giant lintel headstock. So they had to make this, but then they had to make that giant headstock that goes over it. They had to make the pillars here and then the giant headstock. You can see they chose old limestone here to run it out of, but a much better form to run the doorways out of. Neat thing you also see in this and these domes is this runoff. Almost looks like a guttering system and an ejective for water so it doesn't just run down the walls. And it falls down, splattering upon here, and then it vents and runs out at an angle. Almost like you see the giant rocks at Baalbek at the end of that, where it has that little channeling off effect, but kind of neat. And it looks like a garden scene you'd walk across. And they say every single one of these is a mausoleum and such, but I believe a lot of these were probably domiciles at one time and then turned into such. And just because they find bones in certain ones doesn't mean that that's what it was in elder times. You can see the structure around this doorway and this inset door, this cut in solid rock, gigantic pieces. Here's a man coming out, and it's not to signify that he's so much larger than the people that used to build these, although I've heard that, well, these people must have been 5 foot tall, but you just step in, and hey, if they put a trap on the other side of it where it's a false hole and it's got a bunch of spikes on it, that's really going to screw you up some. Look at these cyclopean rocks, but also look at this rim where it has this mantling effect. And again, this corbelled top onto it, but it even has a rim on it, right? Nice manufacture here off of it. Of course, a lot of these are looked at as being later. This is nothing like, well, 3000 BC. This is much later. A walkway that runs out to it, so you'll never step in the dirt. And surprisingly, it looks like people have stole 2 rows off of it, but not the other 2 rows in some way, shape, or form. He's probably looking back in there like, what the hell are they digging in the side of this rock and building a tomb that looks like this? It's got a fake wooden roof on the top of it, scalloped off. People have noted how well that's made too, and these fake doorways look like the doors out there. And here we have a fake house made out of solid rock. There's a flash picture of it, so it kind of shows you a little bit of the intricate detail a little bit better. Door frames, insetting, places to put little edifications and things like tchotchkes and so on. And other ones, you'd never know they were there. This used to be on the right-hand side, just all covered up with a bunch of crap. And people have found the Cyclopean wall, and so on. And supposedly this guy, which I'll show you in a second, has a garden right outside of it. Ended up figuring out, hey, there's this thing over here on the wall. Last year there was a tomb found by another gardener just out there going, hey, there's a hole in the ground and it goes into this big area, and they had people come in and so on. Look at the look of this, how intricate this tomb set is. And they always have pillows. The other picture here I'll show you in a second is a lot better. This is almost the grain of a newspaper. Looks like somebody did an effect to it, actually. Yeah, it's got a grain texture effect onto it, like it's been put on canvas. But look around the room here and you see pillows, 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 and you'll see these guys in a minute laying down and reclining, and they used to eat laying on their sides. You see it in a lot of the Greek art and so on, and eating grapes and all the things that people talk about. People used to eat, that's how they ate food, is on their sides and so on. Look at this giant ceiling and this side corbelling here that's done onto it, and these fake wooden beams, even painted and stuff, all running through here in this giant ranch style house. It's really just carved off on the side of a rock hill, very much like this. Almost doesn't make sense. And you look how bad that's worn down and eroded from water running down it, and how quickly that happened, and how some of the other places are. Here's that picture of those tombs we were looking at a little bit ago, and then here's a guy that's got his garden right here right now. But that edging that's pulled into here, and so that was here. So really it looks like this was a terraced garden at one time, perhaps too, for people that may have lived here. They say they're tombs, but not necessarily so. And there's even cut-in footsteps where you step up to be able to walk on that, and then there's niche here that are pretty wide that you can come up and help to do something with this, or help fortify the wall. And the size of that wall that this is made out of too. And it's all Cyclopean rock again. Just strange and standout things here. In a moment we're going to start looking at a lot of the art and things that are found in tombs. Some early, a lot of it that's beautiful is late. Look at these sets in the ground where it said a lot of women were pouring water into these, and then that would overfill, and the women would jump in and it would overfill so bad at one time and spill down into the areas below that and fertilize the land. I don't know if somebody saw this. Sounds like one of Herodotus' tales, and they had giant ants, or something's coming out of it. But strangely, these overhangs, and again, this architecture that's around the edges and these lines. Ooh, I wonder if y'all can hear that thunder that's happening. If it cuts timing on me, it's liable to ruin my whole video. Matter of fact, whenever he gets over here close to 45, I'm going to kill this one and go to the second half of it, which will be much shorter. And that way we'll be able to see it right after each other and so on. But look at this and how intricate this is, and how they're using two different colors of stone, and there's a plastering over the entire wall that looks like some type of primordial concrete, believe it or not. And of course concrete is with Crete, and Crete are the Cretan people and Minoans and things going on, and that ash really helped out a whole lot in the solidifying cement. By the way, it was rock that had been dejected, and then you put it back together. It's amazing. And the tops are lighter, and look how they're smoothed off, and all these little burial sets that are all through here, and it gives you a sense of like being in some kind of foreign movie or some kind of Indiana Jones world type thing. And you see things like this where a whole rockscape has been all excavated out with staircases and steps and places for running water to run off and in between and out. And then there's those same doorways and certain places that you can only get up through here, and they seemed like they were a little more easy guarded in certain areas, so it may have been more fortification. And even awnings here made out of solid stone that are dripping off. And look at this burial here and how it's extremely nice, round, incredibly built around it, with again that coralish set of limestone that's been pigmented out and this harder stone. And you can see they're put together quite well. This isn't seamless in all of its seams, but quite a few of these seams are just, literally without a seam, if you will. And archaeologists looking at all these different places. These are Etrurian, though, in Italy is where we were looking at this set. Man, now it's starting to rain real hard. Guys, I'm going to kill it here in a second, but this would be a great place to do it. Here we have an awning in something that's not built in an arch style, but it's built like it is in the pyramids inside the Great Hall itself. You can see what's done here is there's a huge rock, of course, and then there's a large piece with just a portion of it sticking over. So it's not cantilevered and wanting to fall forward in any way whenever weight's put on it. then the next weight rock that's up is only sticking 1/3 of its body off of that, giving full cantilever weight back on this side and not on that side. You have to push 3 times the amount of weight down onto here to do that, and this isn't going to move because of that. It's also seamed with the rock back here, and then all the weight that's on the back side of all of this and this rock is allowing it not to move. And then you can see this corbelled set rock here that's actually got a little inset cut into it. And right here in this one, instead of just coming straight out, it actually goes up just a hair and then cuts in, just to show one extra cut, I guess. It didn't have to be done in any way. But then you can see those two rocks that are smaller are just inset, and they would fall forward on their own weight if that giant piece wasn't in there holding it all up together, and the weight and saturated and how it runs down. And you'd think if they have it all weighted on this front corner of this rock here, that they would have stuff up under it, so then that weight would distribute like you do modern buildings. But their understanding of cantilevering of weight is incredible, and of course that uses fulcrums and things like that, and it probably gives you a hint to how they helped to do all of this. But the size of the fulcrums and things, I guess that's where a lot of those ancient forests went to back in the day. Ooh, I don't know if y'all hear that thunder going on and the lightning that's happening around here, but yeah, I think it's better time for me to stop it right here. We're only hitting about 42 minutes, and that's okay, and close enough to 45. So when we start the next one, we'll only have a couple of minutes between. It'll give everybody a chance to take a bathroom break or whatever you need to when we go to part 2 here. It'll be in your top left-hand corner, though, coming up. And so, yeah, like, share, and subscribe before you go, though, guys. And we'll go on to part 2 of this, where it shows a lot more internal art and some more of the architecture and some more information. And we'll kind of put this all together as our Etruscan series goes. Top left, click it now. We'll see y'all there. Peace.